Hello and welcome to Indian Standard Time. I'm Siddharth Varadarajan and my guest today is an old friend, Peter Varghese, former Australian High Commissioner to India, former Foreign Secretary or Secretary of the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade of Australia, and now wearing the exalted hat of Chancellor of University of Queensland. Welcome to the show, sir.
Thank you very much, Siddharth. Great to be here.
My own interests are essentially the India-Australia strategic partnership and Australia's views on security in Asia and East Asia in particular. But I know we have plenty of young viewers here who will get very upset that I'm interviewing the Chancellor of a big Australian university and I don't put to you at least some questions on the prospect of more Indian students studying in Australia in general and at your university. Is this something that you're very bullish about, not just because you've been a High Commissioner here, but in general, I know that Australia is a sort of prized destination for Indian students, and you have quite an active campaign to get people to come over.
We do. Australia has a very internationalized university system. 1 in 4 of our students at university are international students. And India now is our second largest source of students across the board, vocational, school and university. So it's already a substantial part of the relationship, and we're keen to build it up further. We're keen to really deepen an education partnership with India because India has such a huge upskilling challenge ahead of it. 400 million to be upskilled in the next 6 years, and Australia would like to work with India on that. I'm particularly keen to focus more on Australia as a quality education destination. I think it's fair to say that at the moment, students coming to Australia are interested primarily in a migration pathway, and that's an entirely legitimate and welcome thing, but we'd also like Australia to be seen as a place to go for a world-class education because our university sector is a very well-grounded sector. We have 6 of our 40 universities in the top 100. There are not many countries that can boast a large proportion of their universities in the top 100. So I think there's a lot more we can do together. And while I'm here, I've been meeting with some of the universities to register that message.
I know that a lot of I wouldn't call them fly-by-night, but slightly dodgy cooking institutes, and as they existed in the past, were essentially conduits to lure potential immigrants. But
yes,
are you saying that even mainline Australian universities attract a lot of undergraduates who come to Australia essentially with the view to migrate? Because I don't think that's the case necessarily with Indians going to the UK or North America.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that the majority of Indian students coming to Australia have a migration objective in mind.
Right.
So the proportion of Indian students who are at the G8 universities, our sandstone universities, are actually under 10% of Indian students.
Right. And when you say you and others in the Australian educational field are looking to ramp up the relationship, might this also involve at some stage offshoring, creating within India itself partnerships or Australian university facilities here to absorb?
Look, I think that's going to depend entirely on where India comes out on its international education policy. Okay. So until that framework is in place and the ground rules are clear, I think people will hold off making any decisions on that. But the idea of working together, I think, is already embedded in our thinking. Whether that can extend further to setting up campuses in India will depend on how the Indian government wants to approach it.
Right.
Yeah.
If we now move to the big picture as far as India, Australia and the Asia-Pacific, Indo-Pacific region is concerned, you have personally been involved as High Commissioner and as Foreign Secretary in, to my mind, this huge expansion in the bilateral relationship. India and Australia in many ways are a great fit, culturally, economically, in strategic terms. It's a different matter that the kind of proximity that we see that has developed over the last few years was a long time in the making.
Yes.
2016 has also been a good year. The civil nuclear agreement entered into force. There have been high-level military visits. I think our finance minister was in Australia 2 years ago. We had high-profile prime ministerial visits India. Mr. Modi went to Australia,
Yes.
and hopefully Mr. Turnbull will come to India next year. This is really quite unprecedented, isn't it? I mean, 15 years ago, could you have imagined this level of continuous engagement?
Well, I think the relationship is probably the strongest it's ever been, and it's in something of a sweet spot. And I think in the end, what that reflects is that the underlying complementarity of interests between the two countries is now finding real expression, and it's finding expression on the economic front, it's finding expression on the strategic front, and of course now on the people-to-people front. So this is very encouraging, I think, for where the relationship is heading. We are doing so much more on the strategic front. You know, when I finished my term as High Commissioner here at the end of 2012, I thought that the economic relationship would move much faster than the strategic relationship. In fact, it's been almost the reverse. The strategic relationship has moved much more quickly.
Right.
And that's because I think India and Australia are recognizing a congruence of interest strategically. And that relates to our shared characteristic as a liberal democracy. It relates to the way in which we see the security dynamics of the Indo-Pacific. It's reflected in our very conscious shift from an Asia-Pacific framework to an Indo-Pacific framework. So I think there's still a lot of room for us to further develop that strategic relationship. And similarly, when you look at the economic field, the sort of things that the Indian economy, a growing Indian economy, now the fastest growing large economy in the world, the demand side of that and the supply ability of Australia will come into, I think, a much neater symmetry. And that will build the relationship. If we can do an FTA, all the better. It will speed things along. But with or without an FTA, I think there's a great deal of scope for us to do more.
And Mr. Adani's investments in Australia, are they a help or a hindrance?
Oh, without a doubt, it's a positive story because it's a very substantial investment already. And assuming that the final decision to go ahead is taken, it'll be by a very large measure the largest Indian investment in Australia and the largest coal mine, not just in Australia, but probably the largest coal mine in the world.
And the opposition that we've heard will fade away, dissipate?
Well, you know, Australia, like India, is a very robust democracy, and so you'll find people with a range of views. It's met with some environmentalist opposition, it's met with some indigenous group opposition, but I think at the government level, certainly at federal and state level, there's strong support for it. The employment generation is important. I think regional councils, local mayors, they're very supportive of the project.
Right. If you cast your mind back to when you were High Commissioner and when you were Foreign Secretary, the big strategic quandary at that time, or the dilemma, was to what extent should India and Australia, which obviously have ambitious plans together, to what extent should they pool their resources or their approach with other like-minded regional or extra-regional powers like Japan and America?
Yes.
Right? There was the whole debate over the Quad,
Yes.
the stillborn Quad, which I think Kevin Rudd squashed when he became PM. They had maybe 2 meetings at the official level, and then everybody's appetite to engage in that manner and irritate the Chinese decreased sharply. But once again, the Quad is back on the table. There's naval exercises that are happening at different levels involving 3 or 4 countries. What explains this seesaw between the earlier squeamishness? And I know perhaps at that time, apart from Taro Aso, who was a Japanese foreign minister, who was the most enthusiastic backer of the Quad, people had reservations in India, in Canberra, and Washington. But today, I think those with reservations are few and far between, and everybody believes the bulk of the strategic community probably believes that this is a good idea.
Yeah, look, I think there's 2 elements to this. One is that we are in a period of very considerable strategic uncertainty in the region. And that means that countries need to start thinking about not only how they position themselves, but how the region is going to deal with this. Secondly, a lot of what will evolve is going to be organic rather than necessarily orchestrated, because as economic power shifts, there's going to be strategic adjustments, and I think the likely rhythm of those strategic adjustments will be an organic adjustment rather than, you know, formal grand coalitions, if you like, or carefully constructed balance of power arrangements. At the moment, I think what we're seeing is a China which is more assertive in its strategic posture, a China which is acting in the South China Sea in a way which does worry a number of regional countries, a question mark about whether the rules-based system is being undermined in that process. And I think from the point of view of Australia, which is a country which benefits greatly from a rules-based system. I mean, we're not big enough to buy or bully our way in the world. We depend on international norms being observed. We depend on the rule of law, and we think it's very important that the strategic culture of the Indo-Pacific reflect those fundamental principles. And I think whether it's a quad or triangles, what sits behind that are these underlying currents. I think we're more likely to see a series of triangles than we are to see a formally established quad. I mean, we have the US, Japan, and Australia in a triangular relationship. We've started the process at Foreign Secretary level with Japan, Australia, and India. They scope for Australia, Indonesia, and India. I mean, you can have many permutations and combinations.
Right. And of course, you have the East Asia Summit process, which is also, at least on paper, meant to do some of the work for building architecture within the region that will be inclusive.
Well, the East Asia Summit is very important because it has everybody at the table.
Yeah.
I mean, all of the players, and we shouldn't abandon the hope that it is possible to construct a regional framework which is inclusive. I mean, I don't think we should be rushing to exclusive relationships.
But is there a danger that the triangles and quadrangles, etc., rub against this idea of having Pan-Asian or Pan-Indo-Pacific?
They don't need to. I mean, I think they can be complementary, and it's important that we see them as complementary, not as an either-or choice.
Right. Mr. Varghese, the entire world is waiting with bated breath about the direction the US will take when Donald Trump assumes charge of the White House. I say they're waiting with bated breath because as an opposition or as a candidate, he said a number of things that were really quite, that were not in keeping with what we come to expect of US policy.
Yes.
So that element of predictability, which transcended party political shifts in the US, that element is no longer there.
Right.
President-elect Trump has dialed back somewhat from some of the statements that candidate Trump made. But even then, Asia-Pacific as a region, East Asia as in particular, quite frankly, doesn't know what to expect. He has spoken of Japan and ROK, South Korea, playing a bigger role. I would imagine he wants Australia to play more of a role, burden sharing in terms of security arrangements. At one time, as a candidate, he spoke of there being no problem if South Korea and Japan went ahead and developed nuclear weapons, which is such a, in a way, a taboo subject for an American leader to talk about. Even in Japan, you have one or two people who float that and are quickly sort of put aside. But how worried are observers in Australia at President Trump's capacity to upend arrangements or formulations that have worked quite well for the past 4 or 5 decades?
Well, look, I think it's wise to wait. The truth is we don't know what Mr. Trump will do as president. Candidate Trump, I think, raised a number of issues which is fair to say would cause some concern to a number of countries in the region. Australia is a country which has built its prosperity off the back of being an outward-looking, trade-involved nation, and anything which weakens the international trade system or puts back the trade liberalisation agenda would be a major concern for us. Similarly, the liberal international order.
So the gutting of the TPP is a big, big setback or a big negative in your eyes.
It's a very big disappointment to not just Australia, but to all of the countries that were.
But those outside would be heaving a sigh of relief.
Well, they shouldn't. Right. They shouldn't heave a sigh of relief because the TPP was never intended to be a fortress arrangement. It's actually got an open accession clause, and it would be a good thing down the track if other countries could meet the standards of the TPP. But let's wait and see what happens on the trade liberalisation front. Similarly, the US alliance structure in Asia has been fundamental to the strategic stability of the Asia-Pacific or the Indo-Pacific, and it's been a key component of Australia's strategic thinking, and anything which damages the US alliance system in Asia would be of concern to Australia. So there are a number of issues where questions have been raised, and we now need to see whether those questions are going to get translated into the policies of a Trump administration. See, we don't really know what the conceptual framework of a Trump administration is going to be, and whether Mr. Trump comes to office with a well-developed sense of America's place in the world, and whether that framework is open to adjustment and change while in office. So I think that the sensible thing to do is to deal with these issues as they arise after the administration is in place after the 20th of January. We can scare ourselves silly with extrapolations of what might happen. I think the more sensible thing to do is to take it on a step-by-step basis.
Some of the Trump advisors say that his desire to repair relations with Russia are essentially one of the corollary benefits of that for the Asia-Pacific region. I'm not entirely convinced of this, but this is what they say. Would be a more focused approach towards dealing with the Chinese threat, and in a way preventing this otherwise fairly natural alliance between Moscow and Beijing from getting strengthened. Do you see that as a possible positive spin-off, that insofar as Washington's relations with Moscow improve, the attractiveness of China as a global strategic partner for Russia may come down, and that may alter things a little bit?
Well, in principle, no one can object to better relations between the US and Russia, but it has to be better relations based on a set of principles and a set of shared approaches. I mean, Russia's behavior in relation to the Crimea and the Ukraine is of considerable concern to a country like Australia. I mean, I spoke earlier about the importance of international norms and the rule of law, and we don't want to see that breached in Russia's near abroad, just as we don't want to see those principles breached in the South China Sea. So there is a real question as to whether a reset of the relationship with Russia can be anchored in sound principles. Now, you know, the Russia-China relationship has large elements of opportunism in it. I don't see it as a deep strategic alliance because I don't think there's a sufficient shared strategic interest between Russia and China for it to become a deep strategic alliance. They both, I think, share an objective of wanting to bring US power down a notch or two They're both uncomfortable with the idea of a global order which is dominated by the United States. Now, a country like Australia has a different view. We're an ally of the United States. We see the US strategic presence in Asia as a net positive. So I think you know, we need to be prudent in the way in which we go about resetting a relationship with Russia.
Mm. And in terms of the other threats in the region, North Korea in particular.
Yes.
Kevin Rudd recently spoke about how DPRK, or North Korea, is single biggest threat to Australia's security. So far, Australia has, like the rest of the world, hoped that the six-party process would essentially help to generate some kind of peaceful settlement and allow North Korea to walk back. That obviously is not working, and right now you're pretty much in a free-fall situation. But how alarmist is Mr. Rudd being? Is it really a serious threat for Australia?
Well, I think North Korea's acquisition of nuclear weapons and now its apparent ability to marry a nuclear weapon with a delivery system is a very serious development. Whether it's a direct threat to Australia, I think, is a debatable proposition. But there's no question that if you look at the potential disruptors to the strategic stability of the region, North Korea is very high on that list, and finding a way to deal with it is something which we all want to see. Now, clearly, the current processes have not worked with North Korea because they have expanded and developed their nuclear program rather than walked back from it. You know, analysts used to always debate whether what North Korea really wanted was a nuclear weapon or whether it wanted the nuclear program to be seen as a bargaining chip which could at some point be traded away. It seems to me that North Korea's behavior suggests that it sees a nuclear weapon as fundamental now to the survival of a regime, and that will make walking it back from a nuclear weapon capability much more difficult. China, I think, has an absolutely fundamental role to play here. I mean, China has more leverage over North Korea than any other country, although we shouldn't assume that North Korea will do what China tells it to do. And I think China is torn. China is torn between wanting a denuclearized North Korea, but also wanting to maintain North Korea as a buffer state. And that dilemma for China is reflected in the fact that it's not willing to go all the way in resisting North Korea's program.
We know that China is upset by some elements of what the North Koreans are doing, and they would, at least at face value, if you take Chinese statements, they would be much happier if North Korea would stop this provocative behavior. But as the only one of the, well, as a country that has proliferated and helped Pakistan to develop nuclear weapons, there is a fear among some analysts that were a Trump administration to ratchet up the pressure on China, either economically or in military or security, in strategic sense, that the Chinese may use their relationship with North Korea to actually turn the heat back on the US. If that were the case, then keeping in mind the kind of statements that Kevin Rudd, his assessment as a former Prime Minister, that does place Australia in a rather difficult position.
Well, I don't see China fueling the North Korean issue as part of
as leverage, as
part of a tactical maneuver vis-a-vis the United States. I mean, China has its own interests in wanting to see North Korea denuclearized, and I think those interests exist irrespective of where the US-China relationship is at any one point.
Okay, and you know, the one major statement that Trump made, which irritated the Chinese, was of course the phone call with the Taiwanese president, and then his questioning of the one China policy. Where does Australia, I know that you also adhere to a one China policy, but do you think that the US changing its position on this would be as catastrophic as some analysts argue?
Well, the one China policy has been the foundation stone for our relationship with China, as it has been for the relationship with China of many other countries. It is an issue which China sees as a core issue. In many ways, it's a neuralgic issue with China. Now, I don't think Mr. Trump has gone as far as saying that he will repudiate the one China policy. If that were to happen, I think we'd be in very different territory. So I think we need to take this a step at a time and not rush to a sort of worst case scenario.
Right. Okay, well, there's plenty of other things to talk about, a lot more detail. We haven't even got to South China Sea, but our producer informs me that we're completely out of time.
Okay.
So we will have to end it there. Thank you very much, Ambassador Varghese, for being with us. It's been a great pleasure having you back, chatting about these issues, and of course being here with us at Rajya Sabha TV.
Thanks, Siddharth. My pleasure.
Thank you. Well, that wraps up this episode of IST. Do join us again next week with another guest. Thank you for watching.